The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., June 12, 2024. I hereby appoint the Honorable Young Kim to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? Eternal God, our Creator, by your word the heavens were made, and the heavenly host was brought forth by the breath of your mouth. You gathered the waters of the sea as in a bottle. The depths of the ocean you have enveloped in your keeping. Let all of creation revere you, O Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of you. For when you spoke, it came to be. When you commanded, the earth stood firm. Remind us, then, that we are ever embraced by your sovereign power. It is by your word that the plans of nations are thwarted. You judge our intentions and confound our schemes. But your grace plan stands forever. Your merciful design and the purposes of your heart are everlasting. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. God bless America this day. In your eternal name we pray. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. Does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize the United States Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, and the local elections offices across the country who are this year's Cleary Award winners. The EAC was established in 2002 as part of the Help America Vote Act to assist states in HAVA compliance and distributing funds to the state. They also are responsible for creating voting system guidelines and assisting local elections offices across the country. Each year, the EAC administers a national award, the Clearinghouse Award, or Clearys, to recognize local offices that implement best practices and procedures to ensure their election administration is safe and secure. I commend their annual efforts in showcasing the successes of local and state jurisdictions and congratulate the hardworking staff from the 24 election offices across the nation who were recognized. I'd like to give special recognition to Florida's very own Hillsborough County Elections Office, which was named a winner for Distinguished Voter Education and Communication Initiatives. Congratulations to the 2024 Clearinghouse Award winners. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Oh, Massachusetts. Gentleman from Massachusetts. Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I recently visited a visionary school meals program in Auburn, Massachusetts, that is providing students with nutritious, scratch-cooked meals and teaching them how to grow food using hydroponics. Under the leadership of Superintendent Elizabeth Chamberlain, Principal Greg Desto, Food Services Director Breon Pulver, and with the support from the Auburn School Committee, Auburn Middle School is showing all of us how transformative school meal programs can be in nourishing minds and educating students. Utilizing a federal farm-to-school grant, AMS is prioritizing locally sourced foods. On May 8th, they celebrated the 508 Day. That's our area code in central Massachusetts, where they serve meals prepared entirely from locally grown and produced foods. And they have recently started a food recovery program to reduce waste. It's incredible. On my visit, I also learned that since Massachusetts adopted universal free school meals, even more kids are taking advantage of nutritious options at schools. The kids were happy and the food looked delicious. Let's expand this kind of programming to all schools in order to promote better nutrition and to end hunger now. I yield back my time.
Is the gentleman ready? For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Is the gentleman ready?
Thank you. I'd like to take 1 minute and have my remarks amended and extended.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
I stand before you to urge Congress to address our misguided nuclear policy. For nearly 80 years, the threat of nuclear weapons has loomed large. As nations rearm and great power competition reemerges, we must remember the dangers of the past and avoid a new nuclear arms race. For decades, stockpiling nuclear weapons gave us the power to destroy civilization many, many times over, but did not provide greater security. After countless close calls, leaders wisely chose arms control, realizing that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Sadly, we seem to have forgotten those lessons and have begun modernizing our arsenal, mistakenly believing that that will deliver security. Across the nuclear enterprise, costs soar while goals remain unclear. Congress must debate the cost effectiveness of these modernization plans and stop the escalatory before it is too late. Too often, those with the most strident voices carry the day. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Alabama seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the extraordinary life and legacy of civil rights activist Mrs. Myrna Carter Jackson of Birmingham, Alabama, who passed away on May 31st, 2024 at the age of 82. A community leader, community activist, civil rights and voting rights activist, teacher, and cosmetologist, Mrs. Jackson wore many hats, but the common thread was public service. Mrs. Jackson was jailed twice for her involvement in the civil rights movement in Birmingham. She served as the first vice president of the Metro Birmingham branch of the NAACP and eventually commissioner of the Housing Authority of the Birmingham District. Whether she was providing job training for the youth, supporting victims of Hurricane Katrina, or substitute teaching, Mrs. Myrna Jackson never, ever missed an opportunity to give back. Her life stands as a testament to the power of ordinary Americans to achieve extraordinary social change. I ask my colleagues to join me in celebrating the inspiring life and legacy of civil rights activist Mrs. Myrna Carter Jackson of Birmingham, Alabama. She will be sorely missed. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I ask to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
As the Boston Celtics and Dallas Mavericks prepare to meet in Game 3 of the NBA Finals, I rise to celebrate Providence College graduate Doris Burke, a trailblazer who is making history as the first woman to call a championship broadcast in a major American men's sports league. Burke's love for basketball started at a young age and eventually brought her to Rhode Island, where she started as point guard for the Providence College Friars and led them in assists for 3 years. She was selected to the Big East All-Tournament team twice and graduated as PC's all-time assist leader. Later in life, she continued to pursue her passion by calling Providence women's basketball games. Not long after, she began calling games for ESPN, where she became recognized for her keen insights and encyclopedic knowledge of the game. Throughout her 34-year career, Doris has broken one barrier after another, first woman to call a Big East men's basketball game, to call a New York Knicks game, and first woman to call the conference finals and NBA finals on radio and television. It is an inspiration to see and hear Doris Burke as millions of Americans tune in to the NBA finals. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, my heart is heavy. I'm brought back to this moment in history where on June 12th, 2016, 49 angels were murdered in cold blood on the dance floor and on the floor of Pulse nightclub in my city, in my district, and in my home of Orlando, Florida. I'm angry. I'm angry that we live in a world and that we live in a country where gun violence can drastically change or end your life. I'm angry that I serve in a chamber where seemingly most of the folks here don't want to do a single damn thing about it. And I'm angry that I've been fighting for this since I was 15, and we're still in this fight. And so I just want to express my condolences and send immense amounts of love to the families and to the survivors of the Pulse Night Massacre, and tell y'all that we will continue to honor the lives of those 49 angels with nothing but action, with nothing but sweat equity until we end gun violence in this country, because true justice isn't one person behind bars. It's when we can wake up with the confidence to say that this will never happen again. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today ahead of June 14th to celebrate the United States Army's 249th birthday. Every year, just a few days after Memorial Day, our country celebrates the Army's birthday. This marks the anniversary in 1775 when the Continental Congress authorized the enlistment of riflemen to serve the United Colonies for 1 year. The Army is the oldest and largest branch of the U.S. military and has played a vital role in the country's development since its establishment. Without the brave men who enlisted 249 years ago, we would not be the great nation that we are today. I would also say without the great men and women who enlist today in the United States Army, we would not continue to be a great nation. Madam Speaker, I'm a proud Army dad, and in Congress I continue to support legislation that bolsters our nation's defense and invests in our military members and their families. Happy birthday, Army. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1287 and I ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 82, House Resolution 1287. Resolved that at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 8070, to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2025 for military activities of the Department of Defense, for military construction, and for defense activities of the Department of Energy to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and amendments specified in this section and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Armed Services or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Armed Services, now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-36, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. Section 2A A, no further amendment to H.R. 8070 as amended shall be in order, except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution and amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of this resolution. B, each further amendment printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. C, all points of order against further amendments printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules or against amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of this resolution are waived. Section 3, it shall be in order at any time for the Chair of the Committee on Armed Services or his designee to offer amendments en bloc consisting of further amendments printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc offered pursuant to this section shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 40 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Armed Services or their respective designees, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. Section 4, at the conclusion of consideration of H.R. 8070 for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 5, if House Report 118-527 is called up by direction of the Committee on the Judiciary, A, all points of order against the report are waived, and the report shall be considered as read, and B, 1, an accompanying resolution offered by direction of the Committee on the Judiciary shall be considered as read and shall not be subject to a point of order, and 2, the previous question shall be considered as order on such resolution to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question, except 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. Section 6, upon adoption of the resolution accompanying House Report 118-527, the resolution accompanying House Report 118-533 is hereby adopted.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, for purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, last night the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 1287, providing for consideration of 3 measures. H.R. 8070, the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025, to be considered under a structured rule. The rule provides for 1 hour of debate, equally controlled by the Chair and Ranking Member of the Armed Services Committee, provides for 1 motion to recommit, and made 350 amendments in order. Additionally, the rule provides for consideration of House Report 118-527 and the accompanying resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find United States Attorney General Merrick B. Garland in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Committee on the Judiciary. The rule also provides that upon adoption of the resolution accompanying House Report 118-527, the resolution accompanying House Report 118-533 is adopted. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to support the rule and the underlying piece of legislation, beginning with H.R. 8070, the Service Member Quality of Life and Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025. Madam Speaker, under Chairman Rogers' leadership, as well as the leadership of Ranking Member Adam Smith, the bipartisan fiscal year 25 National Defense Authorization Act passed the Armed Services Committee by a vote of 57-1. And significantly improves the quality of life for our service members. It deters our adversaries, it supports our allies, and focuses our military readiness and our national security. According to several top national security officials, our country is facing serious threats to our democracy and freedom at levels that we haven't seen since World War II. It is imperative for our national security that our service members and their families are supported and that they can focus on their mission. Ahead of the NDAA, Chairman Rogers established a Quality of Life panel to evaluate the quality of life of our service members. The panel found that service members' quality of life concerns are a major cause of low morale and family stress, which are undermining recruitment, retention, and military readiness. The National Defense Authorization Act puts our service members and their families first and addresses many of the issues found in the Quality of Life panel. The legislation improves service members' quality of life by boosting compensation, improving housing, ensuring access to medical care, enhancing support for military spouses, and increasing access to child care. Through the tireless work of the House Armed Services Committee and Rules Committee staff, the NDAA advances important policies to support our warfighters at home and abroad and deter our adversaries. It is the NDAA's intent to ensure that our nation's military is organized, trained, and equipped to deter our adversaries. Communist China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and any other nations or terrorist groups must know that they will never succeed in a war with the United States of America. The NDAA restores American deterrence by restoring lethality, defending Israel, securing our southern border, and providing oversight and accountability. To deter our adversaries, we must continue to modernize our military. The National Defense Authorization Act boosts innovation, providing for the development and fielding of AI, quantum computing, and autonomous systems. The legislation also removes Communist China from our supply chain and prevents the Communist China spies from infiltrating our research institutions inside the United States of America. The NDAA bolsters Taiwan's defense and supports our Indo-Pacific allies as they work to deter our shared adversaries. This legislation also supports our ally Israel as they defend themselves from Hamas terrorists by expanding U.S.-Israel military exercises while also fully funding cooperative missile defense programs. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the Armed Services Committee included language that saves our taxpayers over $30 billion by cutting inefficient programs, obsolete weapons, and Pentagon bureaucracy. We live in the greatest free nation on earth, and it's imperative that we support those who protect it. The fiscal year 25 National Defense Authorization Act is another step in that direction. Moving on to the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find United States Attorney General Merrick B. Garland in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with subpoenas duly issued by the Committee on the Judiciary and the Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Madam Speaker, at the beginning of February, Special Counsel Robert Hur released his report on President Biden's mishandling of classified documents that were discovered in his home and office in 2022. On February 27th, the Judiciary and Oversight Committees issued identical subpoenas compelling production of certain documents, including audio and video recordings of Special Counsel Hur's interviews with President Biden and his ghostwriter. These subpoenas were not complied with, Madam Speaker. The audio recordings were never produced. On May 16th, the morning of the markup of the contempt report in the Judiciary and Oversight Committee, President Biden exerted executive privilege over those recordings. Now, Madam Speaker, audio tapes are the best evidence that the transcripts provided to the committee accurately reflect the true content. Additionally, President Biden waived any potential assertion of executive privilege when he released the transcript, and he has not set forth any valid basis for invoking executive privilege. Madam Speaker, the following things are true. The subpoenas were legally authorized. The subpoenas were not complied with. It is extremely clear we wouldn't be here on the floor today discussing the matter if that was not the case. The American people deserve to know the truth. Even news outlets in this country, nearly a dozen in fact, have sued for the access to the recordings. Madam Speaker, Attorney General Garland has chosen not to comply with the subpoenas, and because of his choice, he must be found in contempt of Congress. Madam Speaker, I look forward to consideration of these important pieces of legislation and urge passage of this rule. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today's rule is a tale of two Congresses. On the one hand, we have the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which is a bipartisan bill, the result of good faith negotiations between Republicans and Democrats on the House Armed Services Committee to support our service members and provide for our national defense. This NDAA accommodates the diverse interests of members of the House in ways that, while inevitably not satisfying everyone on every point, represent compromises that ensure the bill can become law. But attached to this rule are two nakedly partisan and groundless contempt resolutions based on manufactured allegations, conspiracy theories, and bad faith arguments designed solely to smear President Biden in the lead up to the 2024 election. In the first example, we see Congress at its best. In the second, we see Congress at its worst. First, the NDAA. The fiscal year 2025 NDAA is a solid bipartisan package designed to support our service members and provide for our national defense. I applaud the work of my colleagues on the Armed Services Committee for their even-handed, bipartisan work to produce a bill that addresses priorities and concerns from all across the country. Like all negotiated bills, there are policies I agree with and disagree with, but that's how negotiation and compromise work. Of particular note is that this year's NDAA would implement long overdue reforms to improve military recruitment and retention, a growing concern as our armed services have struggled to meet recruiting targets over the past decade. The reforms in this bill are the result of an in-depth bipartisan study led by Representatives Don Bacon and Chrissy Houlihan into the factors impacting recruitment and retention. And it should be no surprise that the main concerns facing our service members are the same as those of many American families, wanting to earn enough to support a family and to afford good housing, childcare, and medical care. This NDAA increases pay and benefits for junior service members. It fixes dilapidated military housing. It increases military housing benefits. It fully funds child care assistance programs so that all eligible military families can receive the benefits, and it strengthens programs to support military spouses. It's a disgrace that we have service members living in poverty and service members and member families who go hungry, service members who aren't able to take care of their children and families. I'm glad that the Armed Services Committee came together on these reforms. They'll go a long way in fighting poverty and hunger and will encourage more people to enlist in military service. This NDAA also makes significant investments in our national defense. The bill funds a range of programs to support our domestic defense industrial base. These programs will help maintain and create jobs throughout the country and ensure that we can meet the demand for munitions and weapon systems to support our own military needs and those of our allies. Finally, this NDAA makes needed cuts to wasteful defense programs that keep the top-line spending in the bill at a flat 1% increase over last year's amount. All in all, while there are plenty of policies that I disagree with, the overall bill is solid and should garner the support of a large majority of House members. However, despite the best efforts of our armed services colleagues, it looks like House Republican leadership has decided to politicize the NDAA, just as they did last year. Last night in the Rules Committee, Republicans made and ordered dozens of right-wing MAGA amendments that will poison the NDAA's bipartisan support. These amendments, many of which are likely to be adopted by the House's extremist Republican majority, would restrict access to abortion care for female service members and block efforts to promote diversity and address discrimination in our armed services. In doing so, House leadership is once again politicizing one of the few remaining areas of bipartisan agreement in the House, while ignoring the real needs of those who serve our country. Last year, when House Republicans pulled this exact same stunt, it killed bipartisan support for the NDAA for the first time in decades, and this week Republicans have decided to repeat that mistake. Additionally, last night in the Rules Committee, Republicans rejected multiple bipartisan amendments to the bill. Republicans rejected an amendment from a member of their own party to add 4,000 special immigrant visas to resettle our Afghan allies who supported our troops throughout that conflict and who we promised to protect. Republicans rejected another Republican amendment to adopt the Major Richard Starr Act, which would fix a long-standing prohibition that prevents medically retired veterans from receiving their full earned benefits. That's a provision that has the support of over 300 members of this House. Republicans rejected a bipartisan amendment to provide cancer screenings for civilian DoD firefighters who've been disproportionately exposed to cancer-causing PFAS forever chemicals. These screenings would help detect cancers early and save lives. And Republicans rejected an amendment that would ensure that female service members who place their lives on the line for their country would have the freedom to access reproductive health care when they need it. Republicans rejected these sensible amendments, prioritizing over 24 partisan culture war amendments, including amendments to relocate a Confederate monument back to Arlington National Cemetery, and to defund DoD efforts to remove white nationalists from our military. But in rejecting other amendments, our Afghan allies, our veterans, our firefighters, and women service members have to take a back seat to the MAGA extremist culture wars. That's shameful, it's bad leadership, and it's clear that House Republicans have the wrong priorities for our service members, our veterans, our national security, and our country. Madam Speaker, whereas the NDAA, absent the toxic amendments, represents the possibilities of a functional legislative process and bipartisan negotiation, the rest of this rule represents the worst parts of this chamber. Since the first day of the 118th Congress, Republicans have spent the past year and a half spreading lies and conspiracy theories about President Biden and denying or making excuses for the misdeeds of their presumptive presidential candidate, Mr. Trump. A year and a half of investigations, depositions, written testimony, hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, and they haven't turned up any credible evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden or his administration. In fact, they've conclusively proven what the world knows, that President Biden has not committed impeachable acts. While House Republicans have been confronted repeatedly with this reality, they've doubled down, wasting the time and money of 3 separate congressional committees on a wild goose chase that's turned up exactly 0 evidence of wrongdoing. I want to make sure we understand just how backwards the House Republicans' priorities are. At a time when the nation has been dealing with high costs, devastating national disasters, and wars in Europe and the Middle East, Republicans have wasted tens of millions of taxpayer dollars, thousands of hours of staff time, and weeks of valuable committee and floor time to pursue completely fabricated allegations against this president. And all of their wasted time and money has turned up nothing. Rather than concede defeat, Republicans have manufactured this baseless contempt resolution against the Attorney General. Everything our Republican colleagues are saying about these contempt resolutions is smoke and mirrors, designed to distract attention from the criminal conviction of former President Trump by a jury of his peers, and a desperate attempt by Republicans to save face after their failed investigations, their failed legislative agenda, and their failure to represent the American people. There's no wrongdoing, no crime, no impeachable offense. The President and the Attorney General have done nothing wrong. Madam Speaker, I honestly don't know who's turning into C-SPAN at 9 a.m. on a work day to watch a rules debate, but I guarantee that most Americans could care less about the nonsense we're hearing from the other side of the aisle about this contempt resolution. Americans care about real issues. They care about the prices at the grocery store, access to quality health care and child care, and whether their kids will be safe on the way to and from school. And it's clear that the Republican majority has not done anything to address those issues. Many Republican members have acknowledged as much right here on this floor. House Republicans have wasted a year and a half fighting with each other and falsely smearing President Biden in order to provide cover for the twice impeached felon who leads their party. They can't even pass their priority bills, and thank God they can't, because their agenda would be disastrous for our civil liberties, our economy, and our national security. So day after day, all we get from House Republicans is messaging, talking points, and a whole lot of hot air. Despite everything, Democrats remain ready to work for the American people. We've stepped into the breach multiple times in the past 18 months to negotiate and cut deals with Republicans to save our economy from default, fund the government, protect our allies, and provide humanitarian aid where it's needed most. We stand ready to advance real solutions for the American people. That offer is always on the table for Republicans who want to take it up. But as these contempt resolutions make clear, House Republicans have shown us time and again that they would rather fight partisan culture wars and stir up chaos and fear than work for the American people. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The chair would like to remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities toward presumptive nominees for the office of president. The gentleman from Georgia is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, the following things remain true. The subpoenas were legally authorized. The subpoenas were not complied with. Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my friend from Texas, and the Chairman of the Rules Committee, Dr. Burgess.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I certainly want to congratulate the gentleman from Georgia on leading his first rule as a member of the Rules Committee. While he's the newest member of the Rules Committee, he is a seasoned veteran when it comes to the work of the Armed Services Committee, and there is no one better to lead on our side for the NDAA reauthorization rule than the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott. I do want to speak in support of the rule, the underlying measures. This was a major piece of work that came through the House Armed Services Committee, came through with input of members on both sides of the dais, and was truly a significant product in that it passed nearly unanimously in the House Armed Services Committee. Every day, thousands of men and women don the uniform, sacrificing time, risking their lives, inconveniencing their families to defend us and our nation. The debt of gratitude we owe them and their families can never be repaid. Advancing this legislation is the least we can do to support them and give back to them. Simultaneously, this legislation continues to counteract threats from the Chinese Communist Party and our other adversaries by ensuring our weapons, our equipment, our cyber capabilities are indeed unmatched. Through the development of indispensable weapons technology and through increasing the lethality of our warfighters, the NDAA intercepts the Biden administration's soft international strategy and puts international security at greater risk. It is imperative for the House of Representatives to support this bill as it maintains our commitment to our service members and their family. And just acknowledging that the contempt resolutions are indeed included in this rule. I sat through the lengthy debate in the Rules Committee yesterday, hearing from the ranking members of the Judiciary and the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The arguments sometimes became almost Shakespearean in their efforts. You know, the old line, I think the lady does protest too much. When that degree of protestation occurs, you have to ask yourself, what in the heck are they hiding? And it's almost as if the American public needs to see this information and make their own decision. The American public, unfortunately, has lost a lot of confidence in the federal government and its agencies because of that very lack of transparency. And it's not just on this issue, but it's on a number of issues. So I think it is incumbent upon us to make the information available to the American people, trust them to use their good judgment, and make the right call on that. Look, Republican members will always support our national defense and their personnel with the tools they need to do their jobs, to do them well, and to come home to a secure nation. I urge members to support the rule, support the men and women in uniform, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I mean, we're all very grateful to the House Armed Services Committee for the bipartisan product that they have put forward here. But as we said before, it's the inclusion of multiple poison pill amendments, all put forward by extremists from the House Republican majority, and the failure to include both bipartisan and Democratic amendments that are really imperiling both this rule and this bill. Madam Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 12, a bill that would ensure every American has full access to essential reproductive health care, including abortion care, following the abhorrent Dobbs decision, which ended the protections for reproductive rights provided by Roe v. Wade. Many states have enacted laws to either ban some or all abortions, which Republicans have declared numerous times as their goal. Reproductive health care is vital, and denying these rights to millions of women around the country and our service members and their spouses is shameful and dangerous. That's why House Democrats are fighting to protect women, protect doctors, and protect patients who simply want to access and provide needed care. H.R. 12, the Women's Health Protection Act, will prevent states from trampling on women's constitutional rights and keep fundamental health care services available across the country. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record, along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, to discuss this proposal, I yield 3.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Fletcher.
Ms. Fletcher is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Congresswoman Scanlon, for your work on the Rules Committee, for your focus on this issue this morning, and in response as what we would do with the previous question. I've just returned to Washington from my home state of Texas, where I am sorry to report that the healthcare crisis we have been experiencing has only gotten worse. Pregnant women in crisis, having miscarriages, having complications that put their health and their lives at risk, are being turned away from hospital emergency rooms because the extreme laws that our state legislators have passed banning abortion of just about any kind. Doctors and hospitals have asked for clear guidance about when and how they can take care of these patients, these American citizens who are suffering in Texas and states like it that have passed similar, vague, extreme laws criminalizing doctors, women, and pregnancy itself. Pregnant women have limited access to no access to care, and even to information. This puts their lives and health at risk, including their ability to have children in the future. Pregnant women have shown up at emergency rooms only to be told to come back later when they are closer to death. Closer to death, that's the standard in Texas. Think about that. And then we have cities and towns passing ordinances saying that women cannot drive through those cities if they're headed to New Mexico or to other places where they can get abortion care, if perhaps that is their purpose in traveling through. And despite requests for clear guidance about what the Texas law means, neither the state of Texas nor the Texas Supreme Court will provide it, leaving women and doctors to risk jail time and more to get the health care that they need. More than 50 years ago, a similar patchwork of restrictions in different states led women and doctors groups to petition the courts to guarantee the right of Americans to make their own fully informed decisions about whether, when, and how to be pregnant. They challenged the Texas law in a case brought by two young Texas women that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, a case we know as Roe v. Wade, which set out a framework to protect the health, privacy, and dignity of women in America. 2 years ago this month, the Supreme Court reversed that 50-year precedent. The chaos that has followed will continue until this Congress acts. And we must. We must pass the Women's Health Protection Act, a bill to restore the framework that Americans have relied on for the last 50 years, providing a federal statutory right to reproductive health care, including abortion care, free from medically unnecessary restrictions. And that is why I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question so that we can bring up the Women's Health Protection Act today. We passed it in the last Congress twice. We have to pass it again and get it to President Biden's desk so that we can protect the health, privacy, dignity, and freedom of American women. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my friend from New York, Mr. Langworthy.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding the time. Madam Speaker, I strongly support the rule before us today and the underlying legislation that will ensure that our Department of Defense stays laser focused on military readiness, supporting our service members and their families, and keeping our greatest adversaries in check. For years, this administration was allowed to waste hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to force a woke agenda onto the men and women of our military, hobbling their training, their morale, their long-term success, all while our greatest adversary, China, relentlessly developed its own military, including even pulling ahead of us in the development of hypersonic missile technology. Today, China possesses hypersonic missiles that can hit our shores, but we do not yet have the capabilities to completely deter this particular threat. The legislation under the rule before us today focuses key resources on this technology, part of which is developed right in my own district in New York's Southern Tier. We cannot delay this any longer. And we cannot effectively secure our nation and to deter our adversaries, including China, without ridding our nation's military of the radical left Green New Deal agenda that they seem to embed in our defense policy moving forward. This policy of battery-powered vehicles harnessed by resources sourced from a supply chain dependent on communist China leaves our nation less secure and more vulnerable than ever before. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle point to the Biden administration's transition to electric non-combat vehicles in our armed forces as a win for the environment. But I ask them, is it really a win for the environment if we source these critical minerals from strip mines in the Congo and transport them across the globe to be refined in countries that ignore many of the environmental regulations that we take for granted here in the United States? Are we really protecting the environment when we foist inefficient, unreliable vehicles on our nation's military while China and India build hundreds of new coal power plants every single year? My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they know the answer, but they'd rather push their false fairy tale narrative that these policies are going to reduce global emissions to score political points. They want to ignore the dangerous situations that these policies ultimately put our military service members in. We need common sense policies that focus on merit, lethality, and readiness to shape our military in the coming years, not the woke dreams of a radical left that would prefer a country to not have a military at all. We certainly know that they don't believe that we should have a border, and as the policies of the Biden administration have so thoroughly illustrated to the American people. I urge my colleagues to support the rule before us today and help pass another bold and focused and crucial NDAA that will support our service members and ensure that the U.S. military remains the strongest fighting force on the face of the earth. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania for yielding the time. I rise today with a warning for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. You are setting a very dangerous precedent by trying to hold an Attorney General who has provided all of the substance requested in a subpoena in contempt. And let's be very clear. This precedent that you are setting is one that your own former president and cabinet secretaries repeatedly violated in the last administration. In 2019, the former president famously said that he would defy all congressional subpoenas. And then he did just that during the impeachment inquiry. The State Department refused to turn over a single document. Under your precedent here, with Attorney General Merrick Garland, who has provided everything that you have asked for, except for the audio recording of an interview with President Biden and the special counsel, you are moving into dangerous territory. There is no legitimate legislative purpose to require the Attorney General of the Department of Justice to turn over the audio recording of an interview of which they have already turned over the transcript. Now, I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle use explanations such as demeanor evidence and character evidence. That's all well and good if you were considering whether or not to prosecute President Biden, but that's not the job of Congress. There's no legitimate legislative purpose in figuring out, quote, demeanor evidence as to whether or not President Biden, how he sounded when you have the information. And it is particularly galling that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going to try to hold the Attorney General in contempt for this narrow issue when he has substantially complied with the subpoena, when 5 of my Republican colleagues completely defied lawful congressional subpoenas last time, including the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. You are setting a dangerous precedent, and you, my friends on the other side of the aisle ought to think twice, because what goes around comes around. And I yield back.
Again, members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. The gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The following things are true. The subpoenas were legally authorized. The subpoenas were not complied with. And I would remind you, Madam Speaker, that the words "except for" are even being used by my Democratic colleagues on the other side of the aisle. People don't have the option to comply partially with a subpoena. Nobody in this country does. With that, I yield 3 minutes to my friend from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is now recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia. Madam Chair, I rise today in support of H.R. 8070, the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act of 2025. As the longest serving enlisted member of the military in the history of Congress, I bring a very unique perspective to this problem set. And I get the chance here to stand and speak about the differences that we may share when it comes to sending billions of dollars to other countries for them to fight their wars. And we can have that discussion, and I respect both sides of that argument. But nobody in this body can reasonably argue that any member of the United States military should be living below the poverty line as they defend our freedom and the very House that we stand in today debating this bill. To frame the problem that our service members face, a civilian can apply for an entry-level position job at a convenience store in my district and receive higher compensation than if they were to join the United States military. As I was serving as an active duty Navy SEAL being shot at in combat, my wife was standing in line to buy food products using WIC coupons, and I simply view this as unacceptable. In addition to my experience as a service member, I serve on the Agriculture Committee, and as we were debating the Farm Bill, we were talking about additional SNAP benefits for members of the military. And that's just the symptom. The root cause is that the DoD brass and previous Congresses have been relying on welfare to subsidize American service members' salary so that they could expend these monies on different parts of the defense industry. This has caused the enlisted pay gap to become a chasm and is the antithesis of military leadership. Our junior enlisted have been taken for granted for too long, and it's only exacerbated by Bidenomics, which is creating an inflationary environment that is crushing the entire nation. The first truth of the Special Operations Forces is that humans are more important than hardware. And this bill embodies this truth by including a historic 19.5% pay raise for junior enlisted, marking the most significant raise in history. Now, unfortunately, President Biden has not included this pay raise in his budget. And I find it wholly contemptible that someone, the president specifically, who has managed to become a multimillionaire on a public servant's salary, would snatch the food out of our junior enlisted mouths as they stand in the breach protecting his very life.
Gentleman's time has
I ask
expired.
strong support.
An additional minute to my colleague from Wisconsin.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
I am proud to have many of my provisions included in this NDAA that will ease the service member's transition from active duty to becoming a veteran, and I thank Chairman Rogers for his work and support on this. I will continue to champion these initiatives and will continue to fight to support our service members. And with that, I yield back.
Please, members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do agree with some of the gentleman's comments about the need to increase pay and benefits for our junior service members and service families, but I have to strongly disagree with his attempts to turn this into an attack on the president. We've seen multiple reports from experts talking about the challenges that our service members face, and the challenges we see to recruitment are because our economy is so strong that people have other better paid and better resourced opportunities under the current economy than they have for years, and that has been suppressing recruitment and retention. So I think his economic analysis is a little off. I did think when he was getting up here, he might be here to speak about some of his amendments that were not being made in order. Last night, the majority of the Rules Committee, the Republican majority, voted unanimously to disallow amendments that would protect our federal firefighters from cancer-causing PFAS chemicals. These were bipartisan amendments, and the gentleman from Wisconsin was a co-sponsor of them. So I assumed that when he was here today, he was here to speak against the rule, and I think perhaps that's the best choice until we have a more bipartisan approach to the amendments that should be made in order. Madam Speaker, at this point, I would yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, yesterday in Rules, we had a rare but wonderful moment of bipartisanship as we considered the NDAA. Republican Chair Rogers and Democratic Ranking Member Smith spoke in harmonious unison about the benefits of the bill, which increases pay for junior enlisted members of our armed services by 19.5%. It invests in childcare, healthcare, and job opportunities for their spouses, which are especially important for rural bases like the Cannon Air Force Base, which is in my district. But remember, these bases are often in rural districts because cows don't complain when those planes make a lot of noise flying overhead. And these benefits are essential as we battle low recruitment levels. We must treat our service members with the same dignity and respect that they offer our country and our flag. Last year, however, I might remind us that we had a similar bipartisan bill come to Rules, which was then weighed down by poison pills added as amendments on the House floor. These amendments had to be taken out in the Senate. This year, we once again see many proposed amendments adopted in this rule, which are seen as poison pills by so many. These amendments would block service women's access to reproductive health care and abortion. As the climate faces more extreme storms, one of the amendments would prevent our military from combating the climate crisis and building resilience for our bases as sea levels rise. But, Madam Speaker, I want to speak to an amendment that was left out of the rule. Our Republican colleagues blocked a vote on the bipartisan amendment to extend and expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, an amendment offered by Republicans Representatives Moreland, Wagner, myself, and many others. For 30 years, the United States has provided a one-time payment to some of the Americans who were exposed to radiation from the U.S. government's nuclear testing program, and these people developed cancers or other diseases. For reasons no one can explain, RECA left out many communities who were downwind from these nuclear explosions, like New Mexico, where the first atomic bomb was exploded, or the communities where the nuclear waste from the Manhattan Project leaked into the water and soil in Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. It left out the workers who cleaned up the radioactive sites from this nuclear testing program, which was essential for our defense. Uranium miners, including those who worked after 1971 in Texas, Wyoming, and North Dakota, were left out. Republicans and Democrats represent these communities who share a common bond of grief and illness. Our RECA amendment would provide justice to these communities and make sure they're eligible. It would also extend the program for 5 years since it is now expired. Some will say we can't do this because of the cost, but the cost has already been paid in cancer diagnosis, medical bills, and death. The government assumed this cost when it started our nuclear testing program, when it first poisoned those unwilling Americans. The government recognized it should pay this cost when it first passed WICA. Our ask is simple today. Please let every person harmed by this national defense program receive the same compensation. Blocking a vote on our bipartisan WICA amendment is walking away from the opportunity to do right by these communities whom we have hurt. WICA expired on Monday. Every moment that Congress fails to act is a moment when another downwinder or miner might get a cancer diagnosis, a moment where a son or daughter may start to plan a loved one's funeral. We cannot wait to do what's right any longer. While the moment to vote on an amendment to this NDAA may have temporarily passed in the House, Speaker Johnson, we're asking you to let the House vote on the Radiation Exposure Compensation Reauthorization Act that the Senate already passed by a 2-to-1 vote. I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back.
The gentlelady from New Mexico reserves. From Pennsylvania. The gentlewoman from is recognized. Oh, reserves. Okay, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I reserve and would ask the gentlelady from Pennsylvania how many additional speakers she may anticipate.
We're ready to close.
I reserve. Yes, ma'am.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you may have guessed, I strongly oppose this rule. The rule likely guarantees that there will not be bipartisan support for the NDAA, and like last year, this means that the House will get steamrolled by the Senate. And as we've discussed this morning, the 2 contempt resolutions included in this rule are not a serious legislative effort, but a manufactured dispute between House Republicans and the Attorney General, which threatens to undermine rather than promote the rule of law. We'd be a lot better off with a clean rule for the NDAA, stripped of all the partisan nonsense, so we can focus on our core constitutional duty to provide for the common defense. Conducting oversight over our armed forces and funding our national security are 2 of Congress's most important responsibilities. But the kind of politicization we see from the House Republicans is disrespectful to the American people. It's unbecoming to this chamber and signals to our service members that we don't have their backs when they may need it the most. As the NDAA goes to the floor this week, I call on my colleagues to reject the poison pill amendments which have been presented and maintain the bill's bipartisan support. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose the previous question and the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm prepared to close, yield myself the balance of my time. Madam Speaker, this week we have the ability to advance significant legislation in the House of Representatives. The fiscal year 25 National Defense Authorization Act fully authorizes our national defense and improves efficiency while eliminating wasteful spending and harmful programs. It strengthens our military and makes important steps to address the security threats America faces from our adversaries, including China, Iran, and foreign terrorist organizations. It improves our military readiness, provides robust support to our ally Israel, and supports law enforcement operations at our southern border. And critically, Madam Speaker, it focuses on improving the quality of life of our service members and their families who sacrifice so much to defend us. Madam Speaker, it provides a 19.5% pay raise for our junior enlisted service members and a 4.5% pay raise for all other service members. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the House has the responsibility to protect its Article I authority to conduct oversight and investigations. This week, Attorney General Garland has a choice: either comply with the lawfully issued subpoenas completely and turn over the tapes, or be held in contempt. I ask my colleagues to join me in voting yes on the previous question and yes on the rule. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman from Georgia yields. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the chair. Proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. Ordering the previous question on the House Resolution 1287, adoption of House Resolution 1287, if ordered, and the motion to suspend the rules and pass Senate 138. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 1287, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 82, House Resolution 1287, Resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 8070, to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2025 for military activities of the Department of Defense, for military construction, and for defense activities of the Department of Energy, to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year, relating to the consideration of House Report 118-527 and an accompanying resolution, and for other purposes.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.